Hello and welcome to Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast, a podcast to inspire you about outdoor travel and activities in the UK and across the world. I'm Hannah, and you can email me with your thoughts or questions on live@cicerone.co.uk. Today I'm talking to Janneke Klop, author of our Mountains of Romania guide, and she is truly one of the most passionate authors I think we've ever spoken to. Her love for Romania comes across in spades, and I'm sure you will be as desperate to visit Romania after listening to this podcast as I am. So I was preparing for this podcast and I was flicking through the Romania guidebook, and you did really make me want to go to Romania. So mission accomplished.
Definitely. I'm really, really pleased to hear that.
Well, I read this fact in your book as well, that Romania is the most biogeographically diverse country in Europe. That's incredible.
Yeah, I stole that from a UNESCO website, I think. But yeah, it's definitely one of the green lungs of Europe.
I was amazed, actually, that 2/3 of the country is hill or mountain terrain. That makes it sound like an absolute playground for outdoorsy people.
That is exactly the right word. Romania is a big country. I think I wrote in the book what size it is compared to the UK, but I know it's 6 times the size of the Netherlands. That's my frame of reference. So it is an absolute playground. And it's not like the Alps, where from one mountain you see the next mountain range or the next part of the Alps. Every section of the Carpathians is different from the next. Geologically, the variety is enormous. So it's not just covered in mountains and hills, it's also extremely versatile. So yeah, playground is the right word.
A lot of Cicerone guidebooks are guidebooks to an area and, this range of mountains, and here's some walks in it. But this guidebook, it just covers all of Romania, and it covers everything that Romania's got to offer. And it's a huge amount. There's something like 14 mountain ranges. Is that right?
They're fairly small blocks. I mean, the Făgăraș is Romania's biggest range. It's about 100 kilometers west to east, and then probably 150 north to south. That's the biggest one, which you could tackle in a week if you're traversing it west to east, east to west. But they're all fairly small blocks that you can mix and match, if you like. There's just no end to them. I can't claim to have covered all of Romania in this guide. It's a gargantuan project, and I already know for the next edition I'll want to add things, but I can't keep adding things because it's already a really big book. It's 440 pages or 400 and something.
It is one of the bigger Cicerone books. It's the standard size, but it is quite a chunky volume because it does cover so much.
It's not quite pocket size anymore. You need a fairly big pocket to hold this. So I usually recommend people to maybe buy the ebook too, so they have it on their phones if they want to save on weight, so they can look into the book at home and then read the book on their phone if they offer a week-long excursion.
Yeah. So how many days walking does it have in it? Is that something you've ever tried to work out?
You have me there. No, I haven't. I know it's about 2,000 kilometers, I think. I would have to count. You haven't secretly counted?
I haven't.
I think you could walk pretty much all spring and summer, and you would have to work really hard to do all of it, and then you'll still find that there's much more to discover, because I'm really definitely not done exploring. For one thing, I keep going back to the places that I already love, and then I know there is so much ground I haven't covered, because like you say, most Cicero guides cover a region in a country, and what did I do? I just go and cover the whole country, which makes sense because we want to introduce Romania to the public first, and then who knows, in 5 or 10 years we could do regional guides. I don't know, because the Făgăraș alone deserves a guide, because if I were to describe every single hike you could do there, that would be a standalone guide for sure.
So if you can possibly sum it up, why should people go hiking in Romania?
I knew that question was coming, of course, in some form or another. Whenever people ask me why I love Romania so much, I still, to this day, after 16 years of being in love with Romania, I still struggle to answer that question, because mostly, personally, I go there because I feel good. If you, like me, love solitude and peace and quiet combined with freedom and a ruggedness and just space to roam, that's why I call myself a Romaniac, spelled Roam, maniac, and just not be stopped by or hampered by a lot of rules and regulations, just really feel like you're out in the wild, but really, and have a good climate to hike in on top of that. It can be warm, but it's as soon as you're up in the mountains, it's going to be in the summer, it's going to be a pleasant 15 or 20 degrees once you're up over 1,500 meters, 2,000. And a really long season from May through to September or earlier. I usually go late April until you can easily extend the season until November. And then it's a great place for skiing and winter hiking as well. You see, my answer just keeps going and going. It's just an astoundingly beautiful place with the most hospitable people I've ever met in my life.
But interestingly, you're not from Romania. So you've adopted this country and you've put years and years of work into the guidebook. So how did you discover Romania for yourself?
Well, first, it feels like the country has adopted me and the people have adopted me rather than me having adopted the country. A friend asked me whether I was up to going to Romania for a short trip because she was going to participate in a summer camp for ethnic Hungarian youths. And I said, yes, I felt up for a little summer adventure. And I was replacing someone on the team. It was a team of volunteers who was doing activities during the camp. It was a summer camp to introduce old and new EU member states to each other. And so this was a camp to make Romanian and Dutch young people meet. So I went, and it was just a 4-day trip, but it was enough for me to fall in love with the country head over heels. I just remember looking out of the window in the morning and seeing a mountain range that I still really like, the Piatra Mare near Brașov. Brașov is the #1 city to go to if you want to explore mountains in Romania. And if people ask me where to start, I would recommend they go to Brașov because a lot of mountains are a short ride away, either by bus, train or car from Brașov. So I remember looking out of the window and thinking, I want to go there. But at that time, I had zero mountain experience. And it took a while before I actually went hiking because I did those summer camps for 5 years in a row. And after that, there was no stopping me. I was just going there every year, and I felt a summer holiday wasn't enough. I needed to find work, outdoor related work in Romania. So I was basically looking for an excuse to spend more time there. And then I stumbled across the opportunity to rewrite the old Romania guide for Cicerone. And I thought, that's me. And so I tried to convince your colleagues that I was the person to do this, and somehow he believed me. And here we are.
And it really was such a project to take on because of the scope of the book.
It wasn't an easy guide to write, no.
Yeah.
It was 3 years work, 4 years if you count the editing and writing process. Me realizing I would somehow have to try to stuff all of Romania into that book in 3 years' time, knowing I would have to be very selective. But I'm confident that it's a good selection that I made, and it's a good representation. And yes, there will still be hidden gems that are not covered in the book, but that's okay.
But you've got a good idea. If you manage to walk everything in that book, I'd say, you've got a good idea of what Romania's got to offer.
Yeah, that's not just the result of the 3 years. That's the result of the 15 years I've been walking around and just generally loving Romania and its people, just getting to know the country, getting to build a home there in a way.
So there's 14 mountain ranges with peaks over 2,000 meters. So does that mean that all the walking is really challenging?
No, definitely not. It's definitely a guide with something for everyone, because the last section is about the Apuseni Mountains. That's a mountain range south of Cluj in the northwest of Romania. It's also, if you were to travel by car to Romania, it's the closest range you can reach. It's fairly close to the Hungarian-Romanian border. The Apuseni doesn't go much higher than 1,500 meters in most places. I think there's one lonely peak that goes over 1,800. I haven't climbed it because it's lonely. It's away from the rest somehow. but the Apuseni has a karstic area right in the center of it called the Badish, and that makes for really easy walking. Absolutely everyone could do it. The Apuseni is very pastoral, very grassy, and then you can make it more difficult because, like I said, it's a karstic area, so there are lots of limestone areas with big pits. Okay, that's not geologically the correct term, but that's not my area of expertise. Definitely don't confuse easier with less interesting or less beautiful. The Apuseni, there's the Trascau Mountains. Okay, all these names probably won't mean a lot to you at this stage, but
actually, it's really interesting hearing you say them compared to reading them, because I'm pretty sure my brain does not come out with the right pronunciation.
Okay, yeah. Well, Romanian pronunciation, I think, is a bit closer to Dutch than it is to English, so it's easier for me to pronounce them than for you to. So there's a really nice gorge. I've seen small children do it, but there's a gorge that's filled with, a river runs through it. Well, walks through gorges are fairly ordinary, but this one, the river is there all the time. So you actually have to wade through the river for about 2 kilometers. Okay, that already sounds fairly challenging to a lot of people, but I've seen children do it. And then on the other end of the extreme, there is the Piatra Craiului, which is on the cover of my book. It's a limestone ridge of about 27 kilometers, and it doesn't go higher than 1,900 meters. But do not let that give you the impression that it's easy, because it's probably one of the most challenging hikes in all of Europe you can do without climbing gear. It's just, you're basically on all fours for 50% of the time. When you said playground at the start of this conversation, that's what I think of immediately, of the Piatra Craiului, which means the King's Rocks. And they really are a royal playground, because for me, that's the most fun I can have, just trying to get from one rock to the next. There is a trail, it's marked, but it's not really walking anymore. It's just great fun. And then you get views to the Făgăraș, which is the longest range, as I mentioned. So you could walk from the Piatra Craiului to the Făgăraș, but you see it all the time. And then on the other side is the Bucegi Mountains. And then in between, so there's the Bucegi on one side and the Făgăraș on the other side. And in between, you've got these really pastoral villages. You see, I really struggled to describe how beautiful and challenging these ranges are, because it's not possible to put this into words. I'm a language person, but just watch the pictures, please, because I'm struggling.
This is a hard sell. So you're just saying, basically, people need to buy the book and they need to go to Romania, because you can't describe it in enough glory.
I can't. But that means it's really good if it's too beautiful to describe. But they can read some articles and see the preview on the Cicerone website before they decide to go buy the book, or read my blog, or follow my Facebook page or Instagram accounts. I'll do my best to give them an impression before they actually decide to go. But I can safely say Romania has something to offer for pretty much everyone who is remotely into adventure. Even if you're not very strong or not very young, or very young, if you're a child, I could easily put together an itinerary for every age group, every level of experience.
If you'd like a copy of Janneke's Mountains of Romania guidebook, please use the code Romania25 at the checkout at cicerone.co.uk. If you've got any questions at all, do let us know at live@cicerone.co.uk. But that discount code will give you 25% off Janneke's book. And honestly, it's a bargain anyway for the amount of walking that you get in it. So do give that a try, and I hope you have a great time exploring Romania for yourself.
It's also really easy to get from one mountain range to another, because they're so close together. I really like walking from one to the next and just get to entirely different terrain in the span of a day or two. And it gives me this really medieval feeling. It makes me think of the days when people actually had to walk to get somewhere. It makes me think of Tess of D'Urville by, what's his name?
Thomas Hardy.
Thomas Hardy, I was looking for that name. Actually, in Romania, you often get this medieval feeling because, especially if you go to Maramureș in the northwest of the country, that's completely cut off from the rest of the world. Not really, because they have internet and they have cars, but people have just decided that they're going to keep living the way they did 100 years ago. They have these really small farms. They're really self-sufficient. They just have 1 or 2 cows, 1 pig for Christmas. They're not rich, but they all have their own chickens and eggs and honey from the neighbor. There's usually 1 shop in the village and it hardly sells anything. Why? Because people grow everything themselves. And they build these beautiful, beautiful haystacks together with the whole family. And you'll see people wearing traditional costumes, well, not on a weekday, but there are a lot of religious holidays and they wear them all the time, and they sew their own skirts, weave their own baskets. And it's not for the tourists. Definitely, it's interesting for tourists to look at, but that's just the way they live. And they're not stupid. They know their lives could be a lot easier. They could all buy tractors, but instead they have maybe 1 tractor in the entire village, and the rest they do by hand. And horses and carts, that's really common. So people have decided that's the way they want to continue living, even though it's not an easy way to live, but it's a very beautiful way to live, a calming way to live. Romania calms me down. I can safely say that. I can live more slowly there than I can here in Western Europe.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I think a lot of people who enjoy hiking enjoy the fact that they can leave their normal, fast-paced, busy lives behind. And for 10 days or 2 weeks or 3 months, all they've got to think about is, I'm walking, I'm going to find some food, I'm going to find a bed, and then I'm walking some more. And it is a really calming thing to do. And it just gives you that pause and reminds you what's important in your life instead of the sort of usual chaos that we have.
Yeah. So you just described that as the normal pace of life, and apparently it doesn't feel normal enough to keep doing it because we need a break from it. So personally, I've decided that I can't live that fast-paced life. At the moment, I'm still based in Belgium, but me and my husband are planning to actually buy a patch of land in Romania near the Retezat Mountains and create a small campsite there and organize guided tours, because I feel I need to live like that. I'm not like this.
That's amazing.
I know.
So we'll be able to get the real author experience and come and stay at your campsite and go for walks with Janneke.
Definitely. I'll definitely keep you updated on the process. We're trusting that the landowner is getting the paperwork in order at the moment so that we can sign everything in spring. But it's going to go Romanian style, so slowly.
Yeah, there's some drawbacks to the slow pace of life.
Definitely, but I've learned to live with that. But I'm an impatient person, but I know I have to just wait a little sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, that's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who go hiking discover that they don't actually want to live the fast-paced life. Of course, you have to somehow sustain yourself and have an income. But I find, and a lot of people who I know who do long distance hiking or generally a lot of hiking, is that traveling doesn't have to be expensive. I used to think traveling has to be expensive, but especially, of course, if you go to a country like Romania, where everything is a good deal cheaper than in the UK or in the Netherlands or Belgium. But if you have invested in a tent and a sleeping bag and some boots, and you can actually travel in a country where the climate is moderate, you can actually live in a tent. If you go on a 1-week hike, you don't eat expensive things. You don't eat that. You make sure you carry enough food, but there's nowhere to spend your money. So it doesn't have to be expensive.
Brilliant. So your place will be a campsite, and is most of the accommodation camping when you're doing these treks?
For me personally, yes, that's also how I prefer it. I know a lot of people really like staying at huts, which you can do in Romania as well, but I just personally prefer to stay in my tent because that's my little palace where nobody gets at me. But also it allows me to travel more spontaneously because I'm carrying my home all the time. If I have to get to a hut, I have to call them in advance and say, yes, I will be there at that day and that time. And I don't particularly like doing that. Also, I prefer not to see too many people when I'm hiking, but it's definitely an option to stay in huts. They're called cabanas.
So you don't have to camp. You can do the whole thing with huts if you wanted to.
You don't have to. It's just, often huts are a bit lower down than the ridge. In the Făgăraș, for example, the ridge is 80% of the time. It doesn't drop below 2,000 meters. And the huts are often at 1,500 meters. So often you have to descend in the afternoon, then climb back up to the ridge again in the morning. So you'll be slightly less flexible because you're dependent on the huts. But if you don't want to carry your tent and all your food, that's definitely an option. Don't expect the level of luxury you would find in Austria or in France. Huts are a bit more basic in terms of services, but hopefully that's not what you're going there for. Hopefully you're going there because you want to enjoy the mountains.
Yeah, I think we have some of the podcast listeners who only camp and that's their thing. But I'm sure there are people as well who don't want to carry loads of equipment and they want the option of having the huts if they're available.
Yeah. So there's an accommodation appendix in my book. So for every hike that I've described, I've listed all the huts and guest houses I could find. I'm bragging that I only sleep in my tent. Of course, that's not entirely true because I did test the huts, the cabanas, and I spent quite a lot of time at campsites. Of course, those are not in the mountains, but they can be a good base camp before and after a hike. There are a lot of campsites in Romania, and accommodation is also really affordable. One challenge can be, though, that a lot of Romanians just don't speak English. So there's no reservation system for huts. It's not like there's a website where you can just click through a process and then you have a reservation. You actually have to call or send an email, and you can try to do it in English, but you may find if you call that people do not speak English, and you may need to use Google Translate or use the glossary in my book to make a reservation. So there is that extra challenge of the language barrier. But then again, if you're in a city, people will definitely speak English. But there is, I'm not going to lie about that, there is this language issue. It's a fairly isolated country. So you should probably try and learn a few words in Romanian before you go.
I mean, I think we usually suggest that anyway. It's just to learn how to say please and thank you and, 2 coffees, please.
Definitely. It's a very important gesture to make. If you can say mulțumesc, which is thank you.
You've spoilt my surprise. That was going to be my surprise. I was going to say mulțumesc at the end.
Oh, but you did that perfectly. You can still do that. I'll forget about this and you can still surprise me.
I went trekking with a Romanian a couple of years ago and he taught me a few phrases, but I can't remember any of them. With it being so isolated, what's the transport like? How easy is it to get around Romania?
Well, I don't have a car or driving license. But the good news is I've managed to get around all this time by public transport and on foot and by hitchhiking. A lot of Romanians complain about how well their trains stick to the timetable. And it's true that they're often delayed. But another fact about Romania is that it has the 8th most, in terms of length of railway in the country, I think it's number 8 in the world. So it has a lot of railways. Mind you, they're not all being used, but there are a lot of remote places where you can actually get to by train, where the train stops at every cluster of houses. If you go to the Piatra Craiului, so the limestone ridge on the cover of my book, you can simply take a diesel train from Brașov to Zărnești, which takes you less than an hour, I think 40, 50 minutes. The train just heads straight for the mountains. And then either you walk for another hour until you're at the Zărnești Gorges at the foot of the Piatra Craiului, or you take a taxi for 10, 20 minutes. That's all it takes. Of course, some areas are more challenging to reach. In that case, I would take a bus or a train as far as I can go, and then I rely on hitchhiking, which works really well. I guess it helps if you're alone and if you're a woman. That's my guess. But I cannot count the number of times that Romanians have offered me a ride within 5 minutes, and in many cases have even offered me a place to stay, a bed for the night, a meal, many drinks. They like strong drinks.
And you felt safe doing that then?
I did. I have had a couple of occasions where I did feel mildly uncomfortable because there was a truck driver who would try to convince me to join him because he was so lonely. And then I would say, no, I have to get off there. My friends are waiting for me, and there weren't any friends waiting for me. So there have been a couple of situations like that. That's also, I guess, the fate of a woman traveling alone sometimes. That doesn't have anything to do with Romania, I think. If you're tired, maybe don't hitchhike, or take a break, have some food, have a drink. Don't jump straight from the trail into a car. and make sure that somebody knows where you are. I usually try to take a picture of the number plate and text it to my husband or use a tracker, something like that. But in 95% of cases I've hitchhiked, and I've had a lot of occasions, I felt absolutely safe.
And like you say, that's not a Romania specific situation, is it? That's just as a woman traveling on your own, you do have to be cautious.
Yeah, exactly. You're a woman, you're traveling alone, and you have to be vigilant. That's how this world works, sadly, but you just have to be smart about it. And thankfully, nothing would ever happen to me. So I would really stress, if you're listening and you're a woman traveling alone, please, you should know what you're doing, but you should not let anyone stop you from doing what you want to do out of fear that something could happen. Just make sure you're prepared.
Yeah, exactly. The most dangerous things we do on day to day is usually crossing the road.
Well, people ask me this a lot, when people meet me on the trail, they usually ask me two questions. I'll say them in Romanian because it's usually Romanians who ask them. It's sunteți singura? It means, are you alone? And then, nu ați frică? Aren't you afraid? Don't you have fear? And I explain that, yes, sometimes I am afraid because, yes, sometimes I am scared that there's a bear lurking around a corner. Or I'm usually not afraid of encountering scary people because there's not so many people in the mountains in the first place. But I do have my fears, most notably dogs. But you can prepare yourself against those objective risks. Those are real risks, and you can prepare yourself, and it doesn't help to be anxious about them all the time. So actually being in the mountain hiking helps me to tackle my fears because I know I have to just prepare, and that's all I can do. So I explain to people that, yes, sometimes I am afraid, but the alternative would be staying at home, where I am fairly sure I would die of boredom and depression because this is the life I'm meant to live.
I mean, we're running out of time, but your book is slightly different to other Cicerone guides in that it's so personal. And I don't know how many of our guidebooks have got poems in them, but did you say you had a poem that you might want to share?
Yeah. So this is the poem. It's called The Village Soul, and it's written by a poet called Lucian Blaga in 1924. I'll read it in English. Child, come and put your hands on my knees. I believe eternity was born in the village. Here every thought is much slower, and the heart beats at another pace, as if it doesn't beat in your chest, but somewhere deep in the ground. Here the thirst for salvation is quenched, and if your feet have bled, you can sit on a clay hearth. Look, it's evening. The village soul flutters around us, like a shy smell of cut grass, like a lowering smoke from straw eaves, like a play of lambs on tall graves.
Fabulous.
So this is a good impression for me from what it's like to be in a simple village like that and feel whole. It's a very wholesome place to spend some time in.
Marvellous. I can't wait to come and visit you in your campsite and get a tour.
Yeah, you're most welcome to. If you need some advice, you can always contact me. That goes for anyone. There's a contact form for anyone who needs more advice than is already found in the book. There's a contact form on my blog, romaniac.com. I'm totally happy to give you advice because I'm thrilled with every tourist that I bring to Romania. So yeah, that's Romania for you in a nutshell. And I'm not doing it enough justice, so you'll have to go and find out for yourself.
So, mulțumesc, Janneke.
Cu plăcere, Hannah. You're welcome.
Cu plăcere. I remember it now, cu plăcere.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Janneke.
Thank you.
It was really lovely to talk to you, and it's obvious how much you love Romania, and I hope and you will hope that whoever is listening to this is inspired and wants to go and discover it for themselves.
Yeah, I really hope so, because Romania has a lot to offer and it deserves being discovered, and it would really be a great help for Romania to preserve its natural beauty if more people came there and invested in the tourism infrastructure in a sustainable way. So that's my hope for Romania, that together we can keep it beautiful and make it even more beautiful than it is by supporting the people who live there so they can look after their country for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast. I'd love to know what you think, or if there's anything else you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Please email us on live@cicerone.co.uk or leave a review on your podcast platform. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any new episodes, or you can sign up to our newsletter for all our latest news, events and guidebooks. Visit cicerone.co.uk for further details. If you want to hear any more about Romania, Janneke has also written a couple of articles for Cicerone Extra, so you can check that out at cicerone.co.uk/extra. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but in the meantime, please come and join us on our social channels. We're on all the main ones as @Cicerone Press, and we also have a Facebook group, Cicerone Connect, where you can meet and chat to other outdoor enthusiasts. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon.